Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. And there went Mildred. She's not a crusader. She really isn't. But she was visiting just to say hello, because some of you asked where she was since Finster has been very visible lately. They kind of take turns. Anyway, today we are talking about Symphony number 60, The Distracted. Il distratto. This is a fascinating piece of music. There is nothing like it, really. Let me just fix that. There we go. There is nothing like it in 19th century symphonism. There really isn't. It's amazing. It's hilariously funny. It has all kinds of things happening in it, and it began life as incidental music. That is, as a series of interludes and other things that Haydn wrote for the performance of a play. The play was called The Distracted. It's a comedy. Big surprise. The comedy is about a guy who is so absent-minded that he almost forgets his own wedding. And his absent-mindedness is carried through the plot in a series of misadventures, but all turns out well in the end, most likely. I have no idea what happens in the play, to be honest, but I do know that distraction is the word of the day, and Haydn realizes this concept in all kinds of different ways. And you have to remember that, there are things built into this music that we probably have no idea of anymore. Tunes that people would have known, things that, audiences of the day would have been familiar with. But it doesn't matter, because Haydn even sort of anticipates what we will have known in a way that's it's just fascinating. The incidental music, the original incidental music that Haydn wrote for the play, which is Symphony number 60, got very, very good reviews. We actually have the press reports of performances of the play, and theaters in those days had full orchestras, and those orchestras played, film music, essentially, what we might call non-diegetic music. Diegetic music is music that happens in the context of the performance. That is, if someone turns on the radio and they're listening to the radio, it's part of the plot, or they sing a song to another character. That's diegetic. Non-diegetic is music that accompanies action or dialogue of which the actors themselves are not aware. They don't know that it's happening. It's for us. And of course, there's an overture, and there are, interludes between the acts and all kinds of things that set up the action. Now, because this was originally incidental music, the piece actually has 6 movements. Haydn wrote quite a bit of music for the play, and he gathered it all together, and he called it Symphony number 60. But the fascinating thing about this is that Symphony number 60 is just as coherent and organic and cogent as any other symphony by Haydn. It's incredibly well knit. The music belongs to the play, and the movements belong to Symphony number 60. They could not go into any other piece by Haydn or anybody else. And that's one of the things we're going to be sort of focusing on, because they are unified by certain coherent and recurring ideas. Those ideas are not repeated themes, actually, but they are nonetheless musical objects, because that is what Haydn teaches us. The biggest lesson to learn, maybe, in all of Haydn's symphonies is that creating something which is symphonic does not mean you necessarily have to quote things from between movements or whatnot, but what you have to do is use ideas, concepts, musical objects, things that are not just melodies. You can use melodies. Haydn does use melodies. Actually, there's one rather fascinating one here, but it has nothing to do with Symphony number 60. You'll see that in a minute, too. But it's just incredible. So let's get right to it, because we have lots of musical examples, and the whole thing is just a bucket full of wit and humor and amazing music like nothing you've ever heard. It's an astonishing work. I mean, it really is an amazingly forward-thinking work. So we begin with the overture. Now, the overture has a slow introduction, which is basically a perfectly normal, graceful, enjoyable introduction. The piece is written for a large orchestra. It has trumpets and horns. You can use one or the other or both, with timpani, and then the usual, oboes, bassoons, and other things, and strings. So it makes a very full sound. Then the allegro takes off. And this allegro is wonderful for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's based on the Beethoven fifth motive, da-da-da-dum. I mean, it is as obsessive in its handling of the da-da-da-dum as Beethoven's fifth is. You think Beethoven did it first? Think again. Haydn used that motive a couple of times in a few works, and he used it in a similar way to Beethoven in a very obsessive manner. So the opening theme, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-da. You get it? So we're already starting with something that's extremely fixated on a very, very simple idea. But then there's a beautiful second subject, a more lyrical second subject, that gets completely distracted. It gets distracted. You can tell the distracted part. You wouldn't even have to know that this is called the distracted to know that that's what it's about. It's about distraction, because it just starts repeating itself and it gets stuck. It's like, huh? What's happening? I don't know where I am. And then the orchestra comes blasting in and gets back on track for the end of the exposition. So it's absolutely marvelous. I'm going to play you the whole exposition, and you are going to hear for yourself the distracted part. I don't have to put an arrow over it. It's so obvious what's going on, and it's very, very funny. And we get to hear it a bunch of times because the movement is in regular sonata form. So every time that theme comes up, it gets distracted in its own unique and slightly different way. So here we go. The exposition of Symphony No. 60, The Distracted. And this performance, it's a marvelous performance, is with the Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra under Adam Fischer, which is on Nimbus or Brilliant Classics, or they've licensed it a bunch of ways. And I thank them for permission to use the music, because this is just a phenomenal, phenomenal piece that nobody knows. Nobody knows it. I did see one performance. Leonard Slatkin performs this symphony, and he did it with the New York Philharmonic, and it was wonderful. And everybody loved it. And you wonder after you hear it, why isn't it done more often? It's a good piece, too. It's 25 minutes, half an hour. It's not insignificant. It's a major work. Anyway, exposition of the first movement. Here you go. You got the distracted part? I'm sure you did. I have no doubt. Now, how is Haydn going to develop this thing? That's the question. What do you do in the development section with the distraction and with these other things? And how do you keep it, amusing and give us a sense of what's going on? Well, this is what Haydn does. And it's rather an amazing thing. The development section starts with that opening theme, da 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 dum, ba da 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 da, and it gets revving up. I'm heading towards a minor key, and then all of a sudden, the orchestra forgets which Haydn symphony it's playing, and it goes into the opening of Haydn's Farewell Symphony, one of his most tense and emotionally anxious and rip-roaring Sturm und Drang, Storm and Stress Symphony. It just starts doing the Farewell Symphony. Then it realizes it isn't doing the right symphony, and so it sort of repeats Farewell Symphony for a while, and then all of a sudden the strings all come together, and there's this grinding chromatic. Wait a minute, this isn't right. and sort of grinds into that and suddenly remembers what it's supposed to be doing, and it takes off with that opening theme and then the second subject, the distracted second subject, but it's already been hugely distracted, just so you get the joke. And this is a very interesting, it says fascinating things about Haydn's thinking, I think. We'll talk about that in a second. Here is the opening of the Farewell Symphony, so you know what to listen for. Okay, that's the Farewell Symphony, right? And now here is the development section of the first movement of Symphony No. 60. Not the whole development, but just that whole passage where it gets lost and finds its way back. Whoa, it's quite a ride, isn't it? It really is. But here's the thing that's fascinating. Haydn was already, when he wrote this, a very famous composer, and he was writing for essentially a local audience, an audience that knew his work. So they might have known the Farewell Symphony when he stuffed it in there. Certainly his local crowd, Prince Esterhazy and his friends, knew the Farewell Symphony. Haydn's music at that point was still the property of the prince, although it got out and got copied and got played all over the place. But technically, Haydn didn't have the right to use it for other things, but he did. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't like all that serious. And it's a real question whether audiences of Haydn's day knew that he was quoting the Farewell Symphony. But we, on the other hand, because we have the benefit of critical editions and recordings and things like that, know perfectly well what Haydn is doing. So this is a joke that a lot of people in Haydn's day might not have gotten, but that we do. And so Haydn was writing for the future. Well, he was writing for his own local crowd. They probably got a laugh out of it. But imagine now, I mean, the fact that what would have been a fairly a punchline that most people didn't know is actually one that we all have the opportunity to know now, which I think is just marvelous. It shows you the eternal vitality of Haydn's inspiration and of his way of thinking about music. And he used the Farewell Symphony, the opening of the Farewell Symphony in a couple other places too. But for a different reason, in a different context. And we'll get to that when we get to the Paris symphonies, because it pops up there too. Anyway, it's just amazing. And then the recapitulation does what it does. It repeats the opening theme and the distracted bit, and the overture's over. And it's absolutely marvelous. So that's the genius of Haydn, operating at really, really high voltage. Now, the second movement is kind of a slow movement. And the thing about the second movement is the idea of distraction operates in a different level. Here, I'm going to play you the whole exposition of that movement. It's impossible to tell where the music's going. I mean, it's trying to be a sort of a stately march tempo kind of andante, but it just keeps going off in the wrong direction, and it finally, at the end of the exposition, gets together with an actual tune. That's probably a tune that people back in the day knew what it was. I don't know what it is, but it sounds like dum bum bum ba da dum bum ba da 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 da. It's almost a folk melody, and that brings it to a firm close. But getting to that point, it's just a series of detours and things and interruptions and the contrast between the strings and the winds and the brass, and you have to just hear it. Just try and figure out where this thing is going. it's really remarkable and fun. It's so much fun because these detours and things, they don't sound incongruous in the sense that the music is discontinuous. It's not. It's beautifully put together, but everything is phrased in odd numbers and strange. It's wonderful. Here, I can't even describe it. You have to hear it. There's nothing even remotely like it by anybody else. So the second movement works out those ideas, of which there's something like, well, I don't know, a dozen in the first minute of music, but they all just somehow make sense. It's really very, very funny, actually. Isn't it hilarious when I say something's funny? That's the problem with this. You have to hear it. And either you get it or you don't. There's no way to really describe it. And if you have to describe it, then it's not really funny. But I have to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to get there. I promise we're going to get there. So after the slow movement, we have a minuet. And the minuet, the main minuet has, it's really, it doesn't have to be any different than one of Haydn's regular minuets, because his minuets are always amusing, or almost always amusing, and they're all undanceable because they all have strange rhythms that would trip up any normal dancer trying to count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. I mean, and this is like that. It has an odd contrapuntal thing, and it sort of winds up repeating itself in the wrong key, and it has all the usual wonderful Haydn things. But the trio, the middle section, is where things get really, really interesting, because the trio is a Hungarian excursion. Haydn, remember, was basically born in the part of Austria that was also part of Hungary, or next to Hungary, or near, in those days everything was, it was Austro-Hungary, and Esterházy was in Hungary, is in Hungary, it still is. And Haydn was extremely enamored of Hungarian folk music, and he used it way, way, way before, like Liszt wrote his Hungarian Rhapsodies, and in just a wonderfully legitimate ethnic way. Now, the trio of this scherzo begins with a strong, loud string unison, ba da 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 da, like that. And that may remind you of that sort of grindy unison figure in the first movement, when the orchestra realized it was playing the Farewell Symphony and had to sort of find its way back to the symphony it was working on. That concept, that unison strings playing sort of Hungarianish type music, is going to permeate the rest of the symphony. It's one of the things that binds the work together and does it very, very effectively. They're all different tunes, but their settings are similar. They're either loud and unison or soft in unison, but it's unison strings playing these sort of stern minor Hungarian type thingies. Now, the trio section is so strange. It's a sort of sinister bagpipey type thing, and it is based on music from the main part of the minuet. But we're not going to play the main part of the minuet. I just want you to hear the Hungarianness of this trio, which sounds really mysterious and wonderfully, wonderfully ethnic. It's quite ethnic. Here you go. So that's Haydn in Hungarian mode. And the next movement is a fast interlude. It could be a finale, but it's not, because it's not really in a completely closed sonata form type thing. It's almost a rondo. It's kind of like a rondo, A, B, A, C, A, D, A, that sort of thing. It begins with a fast unison Hungarian-like tune. And I'm going to play you actually, except for the exposition part that gets repeated, I'm going to play the whole movement because it's only a couple minutes long. And it is a fantasia. It's a Hungarian rhapsody, essentially, based on Hungarian tunes. And you're going to hear things that sound like the Liszt Hungarian rhapsodies, and you're going to hear those soft unison, creepy string things like we heard just a few minutes ago in the minuet. It's an extraordinary thing. What it has to do with distraction, I have no idea, unless the guy thinks he's in Hungary, which is a possibility. But it's an amazing piece of writing, and it is unified with the rest of the symphony musically. Because remember, we can talk about distracted this, and all that stuff, but a lot of the humor is just humor. It's basic humor. It has nothing to do with distractedness, distractosity. We can't overemphasize that to the point where it's all one note, because Haydn is never one note. I mean, there's a range, and the range of humor in this piece is extremely wide. The humor simply being all of these fabulous Hungarian tunes that he's just tossing at us one after another, after another, after another. And it's glorious, and here it is. on the way back from Hungary, there's another slow movement. And this slow movement is marked Adagio di lamentazione. It's a lamentation. When Haydn talks about lamentation, he's talking about using Gregorian chant tunes, usually from Holy Week. And we don't sometimes know where they are, what they are. He buries them in the texture, and I have no idea what lamentation has to do with this, but it's a very beautiful slow movement. It's very lyrical and expressive. With a beautiful oboe theme, and it's just lovely. And you think it's going to be finally something very serious, and then this happens. Whoops. Yeah, what's that? Well, it's an interruption. It's a brilliant martial interruption followed by a very comic answer. Notice the wonderful orchestration there, the pizzicato strings under the winds. I mean, Haydn coming up with amusing sounds, amusing timbres that you know after that heroic buildup, you're not supposed to take it seriously at all. So then the Adagio comes back, and it ends with a sort of ring around the rosy theme that gets repeated 4 times, 2 times in the Adagio tempo, and then twice as fast. And then it stops dead. The music, the movement doesn't really end. It has an open ending to lead into the finale, and it asks you what is going to happen next. It's very, very funny the way Haydn does it. It's da 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 dum, da 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 dum, and then twice as fast. Da 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 da. Then it just stops. Here, listen. So what is coming next? I mean, really, what's coming next? Well, in most performances that I've heard, for reasons I have no idea, Haydn clearly intended that the finale should follow immediately on the Adagio without a pause. I mean, there's a natural pause at the end of the movement, but just for a second or less than a second, and then bang, you should be off with the finale. They should run together because the finale itself is only about 1 minute and 30 seconds long. And so it really has to be the outcome of this longer movement that came before. So structurally, you want to have more music. So the slow movement should run into the finale. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it should. And then this finale somehow manages to summarize the entire work. I mean, just like every other Haydn finale, it's kind of amazing without repeating themes, just by showing how consistent he is in his use of ideas. So, how does it begin? It begins with the, vibrant, fast, zippy, happy, dum bum, ba da 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 dum bum, just moving along, and then all of a sudden it stops dead, and the violins realize that they need to retune their instruments because their lower string is playing the wrong note. So the orchestra stops, and per Haydn's instructions, the violins have to retune their lower strings. And they go, like tuning violins do. They all do it, the whole violin section. And then the movement starts all over again. And this time it gets to the end. But in the process of getting to the end, there is one of those soft Hungarian interludes for unison strings. And so the two sort of big ideas in this symphony, that is the idea of being distracted and this Hungarian folk melos that so many of the movements share, it's all summarized in this last minute and 30 seconds of music. It's really quite extraordinary, and I'm going to play the whole thing because it's short and hilarious, and it really does what the finale is supposed to do. I'm just so dazzled by this music. I really am, and the fact that people don't know it when it's so funny and so joyous and so healthy and just refreshing. I find that very depressing, frankly. I mean, everybody should hear this all the time. So here's the finale. Wow, amazing, huh? Isn't that something else? I mean, there's no other symphony like this in Haydn's oeuvre, in Haydn's output. I mean, he was always funny. He was always wonderfully clever at how he put things together. But the idea that he could take, some miscellaneous things that he designed for a theatrical production and stick them together and have him come out in absolutely perfect Haydn symphonist style is really, really something else. I mean, it's just amazing. So I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking about it. I mean, it's just endless fun. Get to know it. Just get to know it, enjoy it, and savor it. And we're in the 60s, folks. We're getting there. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Tell your friends about the Crusade. Let's go. Let's start to get some real audience for these things. I really wish that they did better than they do because the music is just, it's what life is for. Take care.